Okay, you have the.
Okay, so Paul, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you and good morning. I'm Ken Marra. I'm in the policy group in Waste Site Cleanup. And this project has been going on for a few years, as those of you who've been following it are aware. I'm presenting right now, but it does represent the work of a number of people for a long time, including Liz Callahan, John Fitzgerald, our attorney, Jennifer Davis, and last but not least, our contractor, Liz Denley from TRC, who has been contracted and working with Waste Site Cleanup on CAM issues for several years. And Liz Denley did a lot of the heavy lifting for this project here today. Can you give me the next slide? Paul, can you give me the next slide?
That I just did. Can you see?
Yeah, okay, it's just there's a little bit of a delay. That's okay, go back. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So the report is final. The link is on the chat right now. You should have already seen it in the agenda for this meeting, but Paul put it in the chat a few minutes ago. So today, I'll quickly go through the audit, the purpose and goals of the audit, review the history of waste site cleanup data quality efforts, and then talk about what the audit design and process that we followed was, and then take you through some of the highlights of the results. And then finally, we'll talk about what actions have already been taken and then steps going forward that we're considering doing. And Liz Callahan will take over the conversation for that at the end. So can I have the next slide, please? The purpose and goals of the audit, first of all, obviously, is the MCP requirement to audit response action submittals. The second is to ensure that data quality is adequately documented and commensurate with its use in supporting assessment and cleanup decisions. And then finally, this is a multi-lab audit. It looks across labs at their compliance with data quality requirements. It's not an audit of any one individual lab, much less a site, but an audit of the overall laboratory universe and an assessment of how they complied with the CAM across the entire group of labs that do most of the work in Massachusetts. So give me the next slide. Slow. Okay, data quality efforts began obviously in 1993 with the MCP, the Environmental Sample Collection and Analysis, said that analytical and environmental monitoring data shall be scientifically valid and defensible and of a level of precision and accuracy commensurate with its stated or intended use. In the late 1990s, we had the Data Quality Enhancement Program, which consisted of a number of activities and included things like methanol preservation. We put out the guidance and policy for that. It included the VPH, EPH round robin study and those types of things. Also in the late 1990s was when we first put together the work groups for the Compendium of Analytical Methods, which was ultimately finalized and published in 2003. So next slide. For some reason, my slides are going very slowly. Okay, in 2005, some of you may remember the double-blind laboratory evaluation program. It was for VOCs or 8260, and the labs did very well in that one, where they received blind samples not knowing what they were or who they were from. In 2007 was the REDUA, or Representativeness Evaluation and Data Usability Assessment Guidance from the MCP. And in 2007, also, there was further training for laboratories in the LSPs. And in 2010, the CAM was revised. And then finally in 2016, late 2016 was when this particular data audit project was initiated. So the next slide, please. Okay, and the way we did this was that during 2016, we working with all the regions and going through data sets. We sent RFIs to 13 different laboratories. And we tried to capture the majority, the entire universe of those labs that do most of the 21E work in Massachusetts. We tried to spread it out among the 4 different DEP regions. And those RFI letters went out in 2016. We asked for information for 38 data packages, or depending how you count that, 48 different or 42 different sets of analyses that covered VPH, EPH, APH, and TO15. Not every single lab did all 4 of these analyses in this audit, but all 4 of these analyses were part of this audit and were covered collectively. The review, once we got everything back, the review included the material that would normally come to you as an LSP or a data user as a CAM deliverable, but it also included additional information that we asked for a full deliverable, which included all the backup information that laboratories are required to keep on file for a number of years that we wanted to look at. And then the key factor here too was that each package had to be certified and to include the MassDEP Analytical Protocol Certification Form, or the CAM Cert form, which certifies presumptive certainty status. And you can show the next slide, please. Can't see the next slide yet, Paul. There it is. Okay, there's the CAM certification form. You're all familiar with it, I think. Oh, that's okay. But the CAM cert form is where all those things that need to be complied with the CAM are checked off, and then finally signed and certified by the laboratory that CAM requirements were followed and were met for presumptive certainty. Okay, next slide. So the way this worked was that in 2016 the RFIs went out. In 2017 and into 18, we got all the results back and started synthesizing them and going through them and looking at what they said. And once we compiled them with the help of Liz Denley, we could have come back to you in 2018 with the results, but we decided not to do that. What we decided to do was give the labs another bite at the apple. So we took all of our findings, which included things that we identified as potential CAM non-compliances, and we shared everything back with all the laboratories in November 2018. With that, we sent a second RFI where we invited them to agree or disagree with our findings and explain further information that they might want to provide, and then also discuss whether any of the issues that were identified were part of their current practice and if they've been corrected. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, and then once that came back and everything was put back together into what is now the final published report, which again is posted online, you'll see that the report flags issues that we say represent CAM reporting non-compliances. And those would be things like QC measures, method deviations, calculation errors, and laboratory narrations. And it also, you'll notice that it further identifies what we call potentially significant issues based on the full review of the entire package, including their responses. And by significant issue, we mean anything where the result would differ from the true result. So it could be a little bit high, a little bit low, but if there was any variation at all, we would call it a significant issue. And that's really detailed in the report, so you should take a peek at that. But to go into this into a little bit more detail right now, please go to the next slide. For the air methods, the TO15 and the APH studies, overall the labs did very well in that. Their CAM compliance was pretty universal. There were less frequent and less significant issues with those methods. And so they demonstrated that they have a good understanding and practice of performing those methods. The VPH, EPH methods, however, did have some issues, mostly to do with calibration and reporting limits, in addition to method deviations and calculation errors. And as a result of that, we dug into it and determined that about half of the data packages had potential low bias issues. And that would be the worst case scenario, where a low bias would be where the reported level is actually less than the actual level. And even though this was not a site audit, we did go back, for those of you who are wondering, we did go back and look at all the corresponding RTNs and all the site assessments to see if any of these data would change anything to do with anything with the site assessments. And the answer was overwhelmingly no, it did not. I mean, a site assessment obviously has to do with lots of data from lots of different sources over lots of years. It includes many other factors, including other types of analyses, hydrogeology, site setting, demographics, those types of things. So the bottom line, again, is that nothing nothing in this audit and the findings we found would have changed anything in the conclusions of any site assessment. Next slide. And so what happened as a result during this time when we got these results back in around 2018 is that we looked at these issues and that were causing some of these calibration errors, and the methods were revised. The VPH was revised in February 2018, and EPH was revised in December of 2019 to clarify these issues. And they're right on the front page of each method. You've probably seen it, they're highlighted. The VPH revisions include specifications of column equivalency for those folks that want to use a column other than the one that's specified in the method. And then for both methods, there's explicit clarification on peak integrations for calibration versus peak integrations for sample processing, which my understanding is what drove a lot of these bias issues that we saw in the results. And then finally, the report was finished and published just in the last week. There's the link to it. Again, the link is in the chat. And it has a lot of information, and I encourage you to spend some time going through it. Next slide. And then at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Liz Callahan, and she's going to give an overview of the overall global, what this all means to us right now, and then also lead the discussion of what we're doing, the types of things we're thinking about going forward and implementing. So I'll turn it over to Liz, and thank you.
Thanks, Ken. So I'd like to take a few minutes just to, again, summarize the findings that Ken talked about, and then also spend some time talking about some additional measures that we've identified for continued improvement for data quality, and discussions that we'd like to have about some of the measures we've identified, as well as any that our stakeholders might bring to those discussions. So just to again talk about the goal of the multi-level audit and the results. The goal was to look across how labs were performing 21E work using the CAM and the submittals, the data packages they provided for that work over a set period of time. So it gave us a snapshot of their performance. It also allowed us to assess the lab's adherence to the CAM methods and the quality control requirements, including the certification form, which, as Ken talked about, is what the data user relies upon. And the use of that form to flag issues in the laboratory narrative. And by looking across all the labs, it allowed us to identify issues that were occurring more commonly. So we think it was successful in providing us with this kind of information. As you heard from Ken, the findings indicated that the labs generally have a good understanding of the TO15 and APH methods, and following the procedures and CAM requirements for those methods. But more issues were found in terms of frequency and potential to affect accuracy with the EPH and VPH methods. And so the audit results flagged those issues, and they flagged them for the laboratories, and those issues were communicated back to the laboratories to make corrections. And then they clarified issues. They found issues that required or warranted clarification in the EPH and VPH methods, which we have already made. Based on the results of the audit, MassDEP does not anticipate doing a systematic review of past submittals for low bias issues. We do, of course, if we were to find a data quality issue that were to have affected a critical sample in terms of potential for direct exposure, that would be such as a sample in a private water supply, we would act on that information. Going forward, we'd like to look at measures that could further minimize the incidence of data quality issues. And we're particularly interested in measures that would provide a more routine and ongoing check of lab performance and data quality. And the last section of the audit report describes some of the measures we've considered to this point. But as I said, we really do plan on having more discussion about this in a separate set of meetings with people interested in participating in that with our program stakeholders. So first, they include, among the measures, is providing additional training and outreach to labs. And I think this would specifically focus on correctly completing the certification form and providing the laboratory narration on data quality issues. We also think, based on the data audit results, that training on the EPH and VPH method non-compliance and QA/QC issues should be a focus of training. Secondly, we're looking at doing more routine data audits. And that is we're not talking about the scale or the type of audit of the multi-level audit, but these would be more focused on individual data packages going forward. So supported by our contractors, we could more routinely review a certain number of data packages submitted each year. That could be, for example, be part of a certain number of comprehensive audits that we're already doing. And this would allow us to track data quality issues and trends on a more ongoing basis, and to target the information we get from those for training or for other types of follow-up. In terms of other types of follow-up, we're considering using notices of non-compliance sent to labs directed at incorrectly certifying data packages as having met presumptive certainty. So it would be based on the basis of signing the certification form where that information conveyed by the form was incorrect. And we think this would reinforce the importance of the certification form for the data user and other reviewers. Another option we're considering, which we think would be a particularly good fit for the privatized program and would provide a more routine check on data quality and provide it on an ongoing basis, would be implementing a third-party audit program under the CAM. So the use of the CAM is optional, but in those cases where labs are certifying under the CAM, this could become a requirement of the CAM. And in doing this, MassDEP would establish a list of qualified third-party auditors, and the frequency of the audits could be a function of how well the laboratory had performed on a previous audit. And the final option I'll mention here is implementing a 21E laboratory certification program as the type of program that MassDEP has for samples under the drinking water program. This option obviously has real resource implications as well as timing, but we think it makes sense to put this on the table as part of these discussions. Next slide, Paul. So, as I said, we hope to engage with all of you on this issue in upcoming discussions. We imagine it'd be a few discussions that would take place outside of the Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee meeting, but we would be could be bringing back the discussion and our progress on those discussions to this group. And if you have an interest in participating in them, you can send an email to us. Here, we do have an address specifically for CAM, so you could send it to that or send it directly to me or BWSC information. And as to the timing of this, we don't have that information yet, but we would certainly let you know through BWSC information when we're ready to hold those kinds of meetings. And I think I'll stop here and send the floor back to Paul to open up for questions or comments. It looks like Paul is frozen.
Liz, if I can,
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Is that Susan?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Susan.
I was wondering if there was any intent to, when we do audits in the future, to look at other analyses. We focused a lot, even on past audits, on EPH and VPH, which makes sense because they're very complex methods. And that's one of the reasons why we chose them. But there are some other methods that require, what would I say, technical judgment, so GC methods, that personally I've noticed issues with. And I was wondering if there was any intent when this gets rolled out further to more routine audits to branch out and look at other CAM methods.
Well, I think that would make sense. I think that would be consistent with our goals, which is the goal to look at data quality across all the types of analyses that are done under the program. So yes, that would certainly be part of it. And any input, such as what you just mentioned in terms of which methods to focus on, would be welcome.
Great. And you said you were going to convene a subgroup to discuss this further. Is that true?
That's right.
Okay, great. I volunteer for that.
Thank you. I was hoping you would.
Okay.
Liz, I think we have a couple questions from the chat. If we want to take those, I think we have some time.
Okay. You want to?
I'll read one.
I'm not a multitasker, Paul. So
I'm barely keeping up here, and I'm sorry about the glitching. I'm glad I could freeze and you guys kept going. One I already have an answer for, so I'll read the question and the answer. The question was, is there any difference between results for FID, GCMS, and GCMS versions of VPH and EPH? And the answer provided to us from Liz Denley was nothing from the audit. Also, no one is using GCMS for VPH. So there we go. Have a comment. Do you think this will be a work group or just an informal discussion?
Well, I don't really place too much I don't make the distinction. I avoid the term work group because John Fitzgerald won't participate if we call it a work group. But I think it would be a series of discussions where we would, I think the first meeting would be, to provide more opportunity for questions on the audit. and then I'd like to focus on our initial suggestions, and then we can set the agenda from there for future discussion. So I think it would, you know, a couple of meetings at least would be in order. And if people want to call it a work group or focus discussions, I think that would characterize what.
What about partnering with NELAC for lab certification?
I think we would be happy to do that. I don't know much about them myself. I don't know if Liz has any comment on that. But yes, we want the appropriate people at the table for the discussion, certainly the labs and the data users. So we would you know, look for your input in terms of who should be part of it.
Yeah, I would point out that if DEP were to go down the road of either third-party certification or DEP certification, that would be a big change in approach, and would take a lot of discussion and coordination with a lot of people. So that's not something we're undertaking lightly, but I think it's something we really do need to consider and have those conversations. So I think I unmuted the members of the advisory committee who are here. Anybody else have any questions? Comments? Thoughts? Okay, we still have a few more minutes in our time for this. So anybody else want to speak, ask a question, send me a note in chat, and I can unmute you. I keep getting notices that my internet connection is unstable, so just FYI. That would be Comcast, mind you. If Comcast would like
Paul,
to upgrade me. Yes. Yep.
Paul, just to reassure you, Denise is here. I think I just saw her. So
great.
In terms of being a little ahead on the agenda, I think that's okay.
Okay, I'll unmute Denise. We have a question unrelated to lab, but from the earlier updates. Will DEP on the MCP amendments, will DEP prepare an updated guidance document for risk assessment? So I don't think Nancy Bettinger is here, but.
I don't think Nancy is here, but they are in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
So yes, they've been working on that.
And in addition, the public involvement guidance is in the process of being updated as well, more or less.
Yes, it is. We're hoping we can, related to the later agenda item on technical assistance grants, we're hoping we could have those updates completed so they'd be available in that time frame when we're looking to start those grants.
Okay, going once, going twice. Denise, I think you, okay, one more question. And this comes from, I'm still confused on how homeowners will qualify for a DPS according to DPS guidance. I would remove yourself from how are they going to be following the regulations. Keep in mind that DEP, when we get notification of a site, there are things that may happen automatically, but there are steps and decisions that DEP can make that affects the progress of sites. One is issuing a notice of responsibility where we identify people who may be potentially responsible parties and who have an obligation to do the work. Homeowners have both a statutory and a regulatory provisions that may apply to them, and particularly for downgrading property status or any situation where upon receipt of a notification, we may receive notification from people who are not in fact PRPs, and we will seek out the PRP to give the notice of responsibility to. So it's not necessarily, it's usually automatic, but we have some flexibility to put the NOR in abeyance until we figure out enough about what's going on to identify the person that should be conducting the response actions. So for this project, we are in the case of homeowners that have some measurable levels of PFAS, which may trigger the 20 parts per trillion RCGW1. First, we are going to work with them to make sure that their potential exposures and potential health risks are addressed in the short term, that they have the knowledge and the ability to deal with them. If they're imminent hazards, it puts it in a completely different category as well. But the question of, okay, now that we know that the contamination is there, and it's kind of, we have, it's been notified to us, we know it's there. The question is, who is the appropriate party to conduct the assessment and potentially clean up, or at least the investigation for the site? And until we have a better understanding of the distribution of PFAS and the concentrations that are out there, we are holding back on issuing NORs to the homeowners who otherwise likely have downgrading property status anyway, to wait until we have some better information, which we know is coming in through this project, so that we can deal with this in a consistent and holistic fashion. And that may mean that some of these sites and locations might not have an NOR issued until sometime in the future when we have a better idea of where it's coming from. But in the meantime, we will be working with the homeowners who are affected to make sure the health risks are addressed. Okay. So with that, and I think, we still have some time. So, and technically any detection in private well constitutes a CEP, but if I infer low, it would not be considered a release. A detection in a private well at a site where if you were conducting immediate response action, there would be an obligation for the PRP to address the CEP as well. And at some point in the future, when a PRP is identified, that may be one of their obligations. Yes. The question about DP also goes with the property owner. So new buyers would need to refile a DPS. To be clear, we're not making, because we're not issuing NORs at this time, we are not making the homeowners go through the process of filing a DPS. So basically it's putting it in abeyance, waiting till we have more information, and then at some point we will trigger the MCP timelines and process by issuing an NOR to the appropriate PRP, rather than bring in potentially, in the worst case, hundreds of homeowners who all have to go through the process of filing downgrading property status at that point, which would then trigger us to do what we are going to be doing anyway, which is look and see what's going on out there, look and see what potential activities are going on in the surrounding area, try to identify potential PRPs and sources of that PFAS, and have those PRPs be the ones to take the response action. So we are trying to minimize the amount of kind of, at this point, unnecessary paperwork that would be going on while we have the knowledge that sites are there, and we are working to kind of trigger the formal MCP process when it's appropriate. We're told that if greater than 90 parts per trillion, it's an imminent hazard and response actions would be required. Who would pay for that? Is there funding? MassDEP has a statutory obligation to make sure that imminent hazards are addressed in a timely fashion. And what has happened in the past and will continue to happen in the future is that we will deal with each of these cases individually. And if the homeowner does not have the ability to deal with those imminent hazards, that's why DEP has the 21E bond fund to give us the resources to fulfill our statutory obligation to make sure that imminent hazards are addressed. With PFAS in the past, fairly recently, that has included DEP installing point of entry treatment systems in homes to address those situations. Is there a plan to add PFAS analytical methods to the CAM? Yes, I think we've answered that. There's thoughts of plans to add PFAS analytical methods to the CAM. We have been waiting for the, partly for the analytical methods and everything else to stabilize, and so we know what direction we're going. Has there been any consideration for extending the process of not issuing an NOR for PFAS detection at commercial properties where PFAS has been detected, but they don't appear to have been originated at the property? No. Would you please repeat what is considered to be an imminent hazard level in a private well? We are going by the definition of imminent hazard that is in the MCP, which for chemicals that exhibit potential significant short-term health effects, that imminent hazard would be for current exposures that equate to a hazard index of 1 for that exposure period. So if you run the calculations, roughly, and this is all kind of, I'm going to describe it as back of the envelope. The MCL and the GW1 standard is based, the 20 parts per trillion is based roughly on a hazard index of 0.2. 20% of the allowable level is allowed to come from the drinking water exposure. So a hazard index of 1 would be roughly 5 times that. There's some rounding to one significant figure in all of that, which makes the imminent hazard level actually come out to about 90 parts per trillion. So that's where the 90 parts per trillion comes from. We have 2 minutes. I could do this all day, but we only have 2 more minutes. Is it possible to make contaminants of concern at a site one of the searchable features on the site lookup website? You and me both, Matt. You and me both. Yes, we'd like that. In the future, the EAIT, as you know, has been in the process of upgrading DEP's data systems over the last couple of years, a project called IPASS. Don't ask me to tell you what it stands for. And that has resulted in a number of the other programs having their forms and their permit applications and things like that converted to online. It is going to be waste site cleanup's turn in the near future to be IPASS, if that's a verb. And one of the things that we will be asking for is the ability to search by chemical. There is a YouTube video that describes how one can search by chemical by using Google. The caveat that is discussed in that video is that if you just do the search and type in like PCBs, you're going to get everything, because virtually every site has PCBs listed somewhere. They might not be present, but you'll find it in the lab reports as non-detects and things like that. So you have to be a little bit more specific. But in the short term, I would recommend going to that YouTube video of the MCP 5-minute moments, doing that, but try to narrow down your search criteria to include PFAS, but also some other keywords that might be helpful for that. But in the longer term, yes, that is one of the things on DEP staff's wish list, to be able to look into our data systems and pull out sites that have common contaminants. And with that, it's 10 o'clock. So Denise, I believe you were there. Oops, asked to unmute.
I am here.
Okay, let me pull up the I'm going to pull it up. Liz, could you introduce Denise while I pull up the slides again?
Yes,